Matcha lattes in hand, labubus on the vintage tote bag, bell hooks, and sometimes crochet hooks and knitting needles. I am not like other men, I am a knitter. And as a man who knits, I am also oppressed. And that means I can criticize women. There is a certain genre of the performative male who exists within the fiber arts niche, and that's going to be the topic of discussion for today's video. I have notes written for the points that I want to cover, so if it looks like I'm reading, it's because I am. For those who don't know what the performative male is, it's a term that describes a guy who fakes or makes a big show out of his whole vibe for a malicious ulterior motive. Typical conventions they take on include painted nails, drinking matcha, listening to certain music artists such as Steve Lacy and Lana Del Rey, and reading feminist literature out in public. These conventions are associated with feminism as a political youth subculture, as they are typically sported by young women or feminist individuals.
What sets the performative male apart from other cringe male archetypes is the performative male allegedly pretends to have a vested interest in women's interests, like feminist literature or matcha, to seduce women, but then mistreat them. Not only is he feigning interest in women's interest to get women, but then he will mistreat them. And I think this is why the performative male meme has resonated with so many women.
Now, there's nothing wrong with enjoying these things in itself. The problem is when it's cosplay for the purpose of branding themselves as trustworthy in order to take advantage of and manipulate women, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That identity of a seemingly feminist man who enjoys feminist things adds a layer of integrity and validity, allowing their statements and behaviors to be easily perceived as harmless or as truth. An example in another context is when somebody wears a white lab coat and a stethoscope. Their medical advice is going to be more easily taken at face value, when in reality they could be just fear-mongering or spreading false information. So you see how presenting yourself a certain way in order to say certain things is dangerous and manipulative. The performative male fakes wokeness in order to get what they want, which is usually validation and even sexual favors that they otherwise would not receive. In reality, many of these men are just misogynists in disguise who further perpetrate sexist ideas and commit violent behaviors against women. I just want to reiterate and make it very, very clear that I am not making fun of men for having feminine hobbies. I understand that some people don't like the performative male trend because in a way it still makes fun of femininity. I don't hate feminine men. I am critical of men who use femininity in order to get away with doing bad things. That's all. The male in the term performative male is a direct call out to the tendency for misogynists to refer to women as females, which is a derogatory attempt to reduce women to their bodies and their biology. In a nutshell, the performative male is a young man who roleplays marginalization or a concern for marginalized individuals as a get out of jail free card for actually perpetrating that marginalization. So recently there's this trend online to cosplay as a performative male in order to call them out on their behavior and ill intent, which is very comedic, but it's also political mimicry. Another issue with performativity that I forgot to mention is that usually these men tend to be uneducated about women's issues, despite passing themselves off as well informed with the whole feminist literature. And so that leads to them saying and doing things that they may not even know is hurtful and offensive. They may not even be aware of their own prejudices and how that harms people. But, they still do so without intervention because there's this assumption that they actually know what they're talking about because, we saw them with the feminist literature books, which makes it easier to forgive their actions and comments and sweep it under the rug, when in reality, they're actually in need of a conversation and of education. So this video is to spread awareness about the fact that performative men don't always cosplay feminists. Sometimes they stunt their fiber artistry, using that status to spread misogynistic messages disguised as genuine discourse within the predominantly female fiber arts community. I want to use as a case study an interaction I had about a year ago relating to my local craft community, which is called Nits and Tits. Back when this happened, I didn't have a platform to speak on this topic, and I was afraid because I didn't want to come up as an oversensitive, spiteful person. Since then, however, there's been many, many instances of violence against women motivated by gender discrimination. If you live in the Netherlands, you'll know more specifically what I'm referring to, and if you know me personally, I want to use this channel for good, even if not every video is going to be fun and lighthearted. And I want to shed light on how misogyny manifests in my particular niche. Seeing that the performative male is a trending topic of discussion, I think that trend is a good gateway, as many people nowadays already know about the phenomenon. This is a serious video about a topic about which I feel strongly. Any incoming comic relief is not intended to undermine the issue. It's more so that I can get through discussing this topic. So I'm going to be doing kind of a close reading of some comments that were left to shed some light on how microaggression can occur, often in a way that flies under the radar. So let's get into it. Nits and Notes is a local nonprofit based in the Netherlands. I am a volunteer, and we organize fiber arts related events. So we've done film screenings where people can craft in the cinema. That was actually, we actually pioneered that idea, which is really cool. We've had festivals, live music, lectures, all sorts of events like that. We're a safe space for creatives to network and practice their craft and experience culture and have a good time. As you can imagine, Nits and Notes is also deeply political. We engage in a lot of political discourse. So back in December 2024, we launched Nits and Tits. This is a calendar of women posing seductively in self-made knitwear. So why did we do this? Nits and Tits is a project that aims to celebrate a kind of postmodern, if you will, bond between fiber arts and femininity, because that association wasn't always empowering. You know how when women dominate a certain field, due to sexism, that field is all of a sudden not seen as like difficult or important or interesting? So throughout history, since knitters, sewers, crocheters, etc. were predominantly female, this resulted in the invisibility and trivialization of fiber arts, and it being overlooked as a legitimate form of labor. Women were shut in their homes, forced to make socks for their husbands, whether they liked it or not. Now that's a very, very brief TLDR. This is not a video essay about fiber arts history, but if you want a more comprehensive history, I suggest reading The Subversive Stitch by Roscoe Parker. So nowadays, in our community, we're still predominantly women. And thanks to feminist movements, we can now craft for other purposes, such as solely for enjoyment, as well as vocationally. We craft outside of the home, in parks and cafes, in groups, and fiber arts in many ways has become an act of female liberation. Now, there's a lot of mature women who craft, so there's still this lingering stereotype that fiber arts is a grandma thing. So in other words, it's not sexy, it's not cool, it's like a boring thing to do when you're too old to hit the clubs, which in itself is already such a stupid stereotype, because like, have you seen the older women in this community? Like, let me just put like older women appreciation here. Like, they're absolutely fantastic. They're so cool. And that stereotype also invalidates the many, many young people who craft as well. Like, you don't have to be past a certain age to be a legitimate fiber artist, and being a young knitter, for instance, doesn't make you a loser. Which, okay, side note, I get a lot of comments from older women saying that they're like glad somebody young and cool is talking about fiber arts, which like, being young does not make me cool, and being old does not make you uncool. Coolness is a mindset, it's a vibe. It has nothing to do with age. Like, if you knit and crochet and you're like not an asshole, you're already cool in my books. And I think we can all agree that fiber arts all the while is still coded with femininity, and that's what we were celebrating. So Nits and Tits aims to basically reject these negative connotations by showing the empowering and seductive side of women who craft. So we had a diverse group of women, including myself, posing in their homes, wearing items that they made themselves. Now, I have my own reservations about the project. Like, if I were creative director, there's things I would have done differently. But main thing is, I am completely on board with the initiative, as was everybody else involved. I'm proud to have been a part of it, and I think it was overall a huge success. Now, before I go into this case study, I don't hate men. I love my boyfriend, I love my dad, I love my male friends. Most men in the fiber arts community are fantastic. Cue second slideshow. Most of them are allies of and or part of the queer community, the disabled and neurodivergent community. On the whole, they are super kind and friendly individuals who strengthen our community, and they deserve all the love. But Nits and Tits was not about them. I also know that there's some bad eggs in the community who are women, and Aspen in the Moment, for instance, covers a lot of their controversies on their channel. Just know that the purpose of this video is not to turn a blind eye on other controversies or to negate the good stuff either. So anyway, we launched the calendar at an event in Paradiso, Amsterdam, where there were live performances and we had speakers and exhibitions.
And with Nits and Tits, we want to reiterate the idea that knitting can be sexy if you want it to be. And we wanted to create a space for women to express their sexuality as well as their textile talents in any manner of their choosing.
So Nits and Notes posted like a promotional post. I'm not going to show the post because I don't want people like finding it and adding comments to it. I'm just going to describe it. So it was a picture of one of the calendar girls, not me. All the nudity was censored, and the caption was kind of just saying like, hey, you can pre-order, teasing the event and giving some practical information. And also it tagged like Paradiso Amsterdam, which was the venue. And this was the post that sparked one man's comment. Again, I won't be showing his face or username, but what's important is that this commenter is a man who knits. And he says, on the website, you aim to transcend persistent antiquated stereotypes. Very good. But you also say that you want to reinvigorate the craft as an empowering feminine art form. This, in my opinion, is just a confirmation of the persistent, antiquated stereotype that knitting is feminine. In my opinion, that's not true. Knitting is a great art form regardless of your gender. This comment was actually brought to my attention by one of the calendar girls. We were all in a group chat, and when it was shared in the group, we all felt that something was wrong. It felt like a loaded comment, but it was hard to describe why. Now, unfortunately, the messages from the group chat are gone, so I can't share any of the discussions we had, but just know that in this video, I am reiterating the thoughts of multiple women, so I don't take full credit for all of the incoming statements. To say that knitting is great regardless of gender implies that femininity makes it not great. With the ellipses and the very good, we sensed a condescension, you know? But let me show you the event description that he was quoting, and this is from the Paradiso website. Nits and Tits aims to challenge traditional perceptions of knitting and reinvigorate the craft as an empowering feminine art form. It seeks to redefine knitting as a medium for sensual self-expression. Through a fusion of artistry and eroticism, we aim to transcend persistent, antiquated stereotypes and showcase knitting as a vibrant and empowering form of creative expression. This event isn't just about knitting, it's about embracing womanhood, intimacy, and the allure of knitwear in a bold and unapologetic manner. Now, I know my audience is smart. I don't need to explain how the description was misinterpreted, but just for sake of being thorough. The antiquated stereotypes in question are that knitting isn't labor, and that women who knit are neither sexy nor skilled, hence the reinvigoration as an empowering feminine art form. But knitting is feminine. Historically, semiotically, demographically, it is a feminine craft. And that's okay. So not only is this comment patronizing, it's also making claims based on a false premise. He even says it himself, in my opinion, that's not true. Whether there's an incapability of seeing the broader perspective or just a refusal to, like, the issue is not that this commenter wanted to have a discussion. Discussion is fine. The issue is that he sees a feminist project and finds a way to make it about himself, his gender, his experience as a man. And in implying that femininity is bad, he himself reinforces the antiquated stereotype that he is accusing Nits and Tits of reinforcing. In saying, in my opinion, he also hints at the fact that he's a man who knits, which is where that performativity comes in. Like, that status as a knitter is a safety blanket. So Nits and Notes did respond. Hi, we love the male crafting community and actually dedicated a whole evening to male knitters at FC Hyena last year. This calendar and event is, like you said, about knitting as an empowering female craft. We are not saying knitting is only for females, but with this calendar, we aim to reclaim knitting in a feminist, empowering way. That's another thing, right? Nits and Notes has always been inclusive. We've never shamed someone, for instance, for not being good at crochet or like bringing a coloring book instead of like a knitting project. There was once a group of elderly women who contacted us and was like, hey, we're older and like we're not sure if we're allowed to come to the events or not, and obviously like we welcome them with open arms. And most importantly for this case, we've never shunned or excluded men. We love our men. And at an earlier event, like the comment says, we had a film screening dedicated to men who knit, opening with a lecture held by a man. So it's pretty self-centered to see one particular event dedicated to empowering women and find a problem with it. So he responds, thank you for your reaction. I think we believe in the same values. I just suggest to choose some other words next time. So there's that very typical, like, oh, I actually agree with you, but I'm going to criticize you still, you know? It's this response struck us as still like wanting to walk away, having gotten away with leaving some sort of criticism. You know, we debunk the argument, we're on the same page, but then it's like, oh, well, it's still not well written. Remember, when I talk about performativity, it's appearing under the guise that they are on our side when that's not actually true, in order to get away with dropping bigoted ideas or just finding a way to generally bring us down without it being obvious. So usually the conversation would just end here, but that's when I joined in and I say, to me, that means the resistance against the historical association that knitting makes between women, domesticity, and submissiveness by emphasizing female enjoyment and sexuality. By no means does that communicate that men can't knit because they're not feminine. Just like how, even though animal welfare was initiated by women, that doesn't mean men can't be vegan, but the characterization of women as irrational and over-emotional as a result shouldn't be swept under the rug. Nonetheless, if you are unsatisfied with the way the site is written, I suggest you apply to be a copywriter. And so he responds, interesting. I think I felt a bit discriminated. The same feeling when I see knit magazines in the subsection woman in bookshops. Knitting and gender have nothing to do with each other, so I still don't understand the point to mention it. Now, it's one thing that he clearly didn't take the time to read and comprehend my comment, but never mind. Listen. You're not oppressed because you have to stand in the women's section. There's this insecurity and fear to come off as feminine because it's the femininity that's often met with contempt. It's incredibly ignorant to see a history of marginalization and compare that to seeing knitting books in the women's section. To say that something is associated with women is actually genderless is once again an attempt to silence women and antagonize femininity. So it's a clever attempt, you know, like it can't be about whataboutism if it's not about gender at all. And while I do agree that most knitting books are marketed towards women, you're not prohibited as a man from buying one the same way that women were prohibited from leaving their homes and their husbands and from pursuing careers that they wanted. You know, like if you bring a knitting book to the cash register as a man, like they're not going to ask for your ID to see that you're a woman and like deny you from buying the book if you're a guy. If the knitting book shows you how to make pink sweaters, you can just use blue yarn. At the end of the day, as a man, your association with fiber arts and femininity does not harm you. You get to put your needles down after a knitting session and walk away still a man, walk home at night. When women are not knitting, they're still women. Women can put their needles down, but they can't just take their tits off. Everything else women do is still invalidated. Everywhere women go, they are still unsafe. Not just when they're standing in the women's magazine section. My friend and one of the other calendar girls also joined in, and she says, I think that is because it seems we're talking about two very different topics at the same time here. As now mentioned several times, this is not about knitting being for women only. That was never the claim. Feminism, however, very much has something to do with gender, and using knitting as a medium, and purposely choosing this medium, is what happened here. Like Lucy said, drawing the reverse conclusion that this means knitting is not for men is not intended and also not necessary. These are two different statements. And I also added one final comment. Knitting has everything to do with gender. That's likely why you feel that way and emphasize on your bio that you're both a knitter and a man. I don't think knitting magazines should be only in the women's section either. That's part of the problem. Handcrafting will bear an emasculating stigma due to the history of trivializing women's labor unless that femininity is rewritten. Emphasizing female empowerment is not gatekeeping. It only means to be equitable in response to disproportionate sexist oppression, and men are more than welcome to be activists. As a vocal male knitter, you're doing your part. Simultaneously, we need more education on the gendered history of the medium to understand why individuals still feel that segregation. Men also deserve to enjoy the craft without constantly having to battle a sexist stigma. I end with a heart. I end by empathizing with him and even praising him for being a man who knits. And at the same time that I regret doing so, I still don't know if there was any other way. Because the truth is, I was angry. I was angry that I'm not allowed to be angry in situations like this, because if I respond with anger as a female person, I'm just another emotional, man-hating feminazi. I was angry that I have to be better informed. I and my female friends have to discuss such an infuriating matter that involves our whole livelihood, you know, something that people in my life who I love have gone through. with maturity and with reference to facts and history in order to make us listen to, let alone be understood. Essentially, like, that I have to kiss his ass a little in order to have him see from my perspective at all, and gentle parent him because he can't or won't educate himself because he has the privilege not to. Like, I have no choice but to match his energy even when that energy is disrespectful. If I simply say, you're being insecure and ignorant, you're diverting the topic in a selfish and unfair way, which is true, it's unfortunately not enough. And I'm angry because it's not the responsibility of women to educate men and burn themselves out in the process, because, you know, that conversation involves reliving trauma and having their words fall upon deaf ears, such as what happened here. Yet somehow it's usually a woman who fights back and stands up on the behalf of other women. And I'm not trying to paint myself as some sort of hero in this situation. Like, I do wish I could have responded differently instead of, like, I wish I could have been more direct instead of kind of mirroring his tactics. Like, I think we were both being pretty cowardly in this situation. Like, at first I felt like I was going crazy, right? For feeling angry at a seemingly harmless comment. He didn't outwardly say anything insulting. In fact, if this comment were under one of my own posts, I don't think I would have responded at all. But looking at it from a third person perspective is what prompted me to join the conversation, because, you know, the comment was directed at Nits and Notes, who is run by a good friend of mine, and it took, like, the activation of my maternal instincts to sense what was wrong, and it took almost a whole year before I could even sit here today and somewhat put that into words. And that's why it's really scary and complicated to speak up in these situations, even though something is in fact off. It's more than just entertaining a misogynist, right? It's about showing that we won't tolerate ignorance and disrespect. Like, I would rather draft up long paragraphs in the Instagram comment section and kind of make a fool out of myself than respond with silence, because I don't think it's fair to let people walk away after insinuating certain negative ideas about an entire group of people who already endure so much injustice. Like, I think that's the textbook definition of what a microaggression is. I would rather see the malicious intent behind a white heart emoji than give the benefit of the doubt and tell myself I'm crazy. Like, you're not allowed to get away with that, especially not when you're trying to devalue women in my community. So I made reference in my last comment to his Instagram bio. I want to show you the bio in question. He writes, "Yes, I'm a man, and yes, I love knitting and designing knitwear. Member of the committee More Mohair for Men." If knitting has nothing to do with gender, why is your being a man so important for you to mention? You know, like, this is seeking praise for being alternative, for being a rare specimen, for being a man enjoying a woman's hobby. It's taking advantage of a sexist double standard. Like, you know that how, like, fathers tend to get a lot of praise for just, like, hanging out with their kid and doing the bare minimum. Meanwhile, mothers are, like, giving birth and changing diapers and cleaning the house and, like, you know, stretching themselves thin, and nobody really says a word because it's kind of what's expected, and their labor is invisible because they're women. Kind of a similar situation here. It's also a giveaway that he knows that knitting is feminine. He knows that he's a minority in the community, and he's copiously trying to vindicate that for himself. This may sound familiar because it's kind of the flip side of being a pick-me girl, you know? That Tumblr girl who's like, I'm a girl, I play video games, yes, we exist, and I'm not like other girls because I have masculine hobbies, I could never wear makeup, I hate shopping. And aside from that being annoying, the issue is that, you know, women who put down other women for male validation are just internally misogynistic and set us back. And the flip side of that, when it's, I'm not like other guys, I have a feminine hobby, it's still somehow still putting down femininity. Like, you're flaunting your affinity with this hobby to the women in the fiber arts community, but simultaneously you're afraid of being associated with them, stunting your subversion of the typical gender association whilst also denying its existence. You know, I'm not woman-phobic, I have woman hobbies, but also it's not a woman hobby because I am actually woman-phobic. This particular individual even makes a point to share that he also designs knitwear because he himself knows that the skill level to do so is taken for granted because it's a woman hobby. I'm gonna stop saying woman hobby. That sounds derogatory. Like, we're just so close, you know, and I think it's a huge pity. One more thing. He also mentions in his bio that he's the trained knitter. Now, I didn't want to really mention this aspect because I didn't want to go after his social media presence, but actually all of his Instagram posts are him sitting, like, he films himself sitting on a train knitting, which is like the knitting equivalent of sitting on a cafe terrace with the whole performative male setup, reading feminist literature. I think this really is like the perfect case study of like performativity and then performativity in fiber arts, like the facade that, you know, someone puts up online of their craft versus how they actually feel about it. So just in case you didn't see the connection, or, you know, were like, Lucy, maybe he's not being performative, now you see it. You're allowed to be a man who knits. You're allowed to listen to certain music artists. You're allowed to have labubus and tote bags and drink matcha. But if your entire personality is making sure everyone knows that you're a man who knits, if you have to bring up your own identity in order to get your way during disagreements, that's where it becomes disingenuous and manipulative. And I'm not saying that this guy's like pretending to knit, he actually does, but he's also utilizing his status as a rare male knitter as a credential that enables his bigotry. When a voice that speaks ignorantly about a community comes from within that community, it's easier seen as harmless discourse, as on the same page. To try and break or deny the association between fiber arts and femininity is radical in the wrong direction. It still insinuates that femininity is something to be feared and looked down upon, and turns a blind eye on its history. And I don't think I need to explain why the denial and erasure of history is bad. What we should be doing is establishing the fact that femininity is not a bad thing. It's just a matter of fact thing that activities and things such as knitting can be feminine. If you are a heteronormative white man, when you speak, people listen because you have privilege. Your voice holds power. You're more likely to be believed and taken seriously. As someone with the privilege that you have, you cannot complain about oppression when you do nothing to fight against it, when you only experience discrimination by proxy. And ironically, in this one case, if you would just knit and enjoy it and keep silent and just demonstrate that knitting is just like any other hobby, even though it's feminine, you would have been doing so much more for the women who built this community for you. Like, your existence as a male fiber artist, like I was trying to say in my last comment, it's already doing something, right? It's already breaking stereotypes, but like, he just had to ruin it, you know? It's interesting to feel threatened by a stigma that isn't even yours to bear. If you feel unwelcome by a feminist project, that speaks volumes about what you actually stand for. I understand that this commenter hasn't committed a crime or anything, and like, I understand that there's way worse things that he could have done. I do think it's important to recognize that words can be microaggressive and it's still a pillar of violence. You know, when people get away with saying certain things, that's the entry barrier for saying more things, maybe more blatantly, and then acting upon those things that they say, committing harmful behaviors. And I think it's important to see the signs and intervene before it gets to that point. Even here you can see, because my friend and I joined the conversation, it revealed more of his ignorance and his sexist ideologies, whether he himself knows that or not. And I want to say I'm very grateful for my Nits and Notes girls and all the calendar girls, like having that group chat where we were all discussing this particular comment and we all agreed that it was malicious, really encouraged me to have this conversation with you guys. If you ever feel like someone is talking down on you or being backhanded, I highly encourage just bringing it up with people you can trust. Because if multiple people can agree that a comment is loaded, it probably is. You can knit, you can crochet as a man, woman, whatever. But if you don't align yourself with the core politics of fiber arts, what are you actually doing for this community? And this also goes for all the conservative or like anti-feminist, anti-woke fiber arts creators out there. How can you reinforce the very ideas that prevented you from having your platform that you have today? The ideas that prevented you from sharing your creativity and allowing you to monetize it and be taken seriously, not just as a crocheter or a knitter, but also as an engineer, a designer, a business person. Somebody once said, when you are privileged, equality will feel like oppression. And the road to equality is a long process that will seem threatening, that will seem like a role reversal. And individuals like this one commenter are part of the reason why fiber arts are still oftentimes not seen as a legitimate form of work. Why knitters and crocheters who work really hard, whether they're men or women, are still lowballed. And why projects such as Nits and Tits are necessary. As long as they spark this kind of conversation, as long as a celebration of one thing feels like a threat to someone's privilege, they are necessary. And like I said before, most men in fiber arts are incredible. So it's easy to see any one man who knits and read his comments through rose-colored glasses. We have to stay wary of people's comments and actions and hold them accountable for their ideas and politics, regardless of what they look like what their hobbies are. And that's why I can get behind the whole like performative male criticism on the internet. Even if it's like funny and satirical, I still think it's very necessary. We have to continue protecting and uplifting each other. We have to be constructive and have discussions that aren't just projections of our insecurities that stem from societal hierarchies. We have to share and sometimes lend the spotlight to those who have been silenced in the past. And while that silencing still occurs, even in the form of Instagram comments, I personally will be saying something even if it's imperfect, even if I might get canceled. Standing in the women's section is not that difficult. Women do it all the time. Again, please don't try and find this guy. Please don't try and find the original post. You're gonna be scrolling for a long time. Please don't send any hate. That was not the intention of this video, and it's not what I stand for. Again, this particular conversation is just a case study and it's closed. I feel that in general, sexism in the fiber arts niche is just not talked about enough. And just because it's not the worst thing that can happen doesn't mean it doesn't contribute to larger issues. Shout out to all the amazing women who practice fiber arts, whether it's knitting, crochet, sewing, weaving, cross stitch, whether you're young or old, this conversation is about you. Shout out to Sophia Wintermans, who is the entrepreneur and mastermind behind Nits and Notes. She started it when she was like 22, 23. Like, she's absolutely incredible. Shout out to Aspen in the Moment. Seeing them talk so openly about controversies in fiber arts on their channel encouraged me to make this video. Shout out to all the women on social media who are also speaking up on the issue, even if it's scary and shedding light on fiber arts history. I hope that people with more privilege than me, people with larger followings than me, can continue using their influence to raise awareness on social issues that they care about. I trust my YouTube audience to stay civil and respectful with any further discussion that may happen in this comment section. As usual, if I forgot something or said something incorrect, please let me know. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope it spread some awareness and shed some light and maybe also provided some entertainment. And I will see you guys in the next one.